A girl brings home a stray puppy, but her parents realize too late. It's not a dog. At first it seems like a sweet rescue, an innocent act of kindness. But one strange sound in the middle of the night shatters everything. What they thought was harmless is something far wilder and far more dangerous. As the family struggles with fear and doubt, powerful outsiders arrive, demanding the animal, insisting it must be taken away. But why are they so desperate to get their hands on it? And what dark secrets are they hiding in the shadows of the neighborhood? The truth will test trust, push loyalty to the breaking point, and place lives on the edge of real danger. Because protecting this puppy isn't just about saving an animal, it's about uncovering something much bigger than anyone imagined. When the fight between innocence and corruption explodes, what will this girl risk to protect what she knows is right? And in the end, who will walk away safe? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Dark clouds rolled overhead as 12-year-old Marin Latimer hurried along the cracked sidewalk after school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The air felt heavy and thick, warning of the storm to come. She'd stayed late at the library working on her science project, and now she was going to pay for it. The first fat drops of rain began to fall just as she rounded the corner past Joe's mini-mart. "Oh, come on," she muttered, picking up her pace. But within seconds, the sky opened up completely. The warm spring rain came down in sheets, instantly soaking through her thin jacket. Lightning flashed overhead, followed by a crack of thunder that made her jump. Marin ducked under the awning of the mini-mart, water dripping from her dark hair into her eyes. She'd have to wait it out. Her house was still 6 blocks away. As she stood there catching her breath, a small movement caught her eye near the dumpster in the alley beside the store. At first, she thought it was just garbage shifting in the wind, but then she saw it again. Something alive huddled in the shadows beneath the dumpster, shivering. Marin crept closer, squinting through the rain. "Hello?" she called softly. "Is someone there?" A pair of eyes reflected back at her, low to the ground. Marin's heart squeezed in her chest. It looked like a puppy, small and terrified, pressed as far back under the dumpster as it could get. "Hey there," she said gently, crouching down. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The creature whimpered, a high-pitched sound that tugged at something deep in Marin's chest. She couldn't leave it out here in this storm. That would be wrong. Slowly, carefully, she reached out her hand, palm up. "Come here, sweetie. Come on out where it's dry." For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, inch by trembling inch, the small animal crept forward. Marin held perfectly still, hardly daring to breathe. As it emerged into the dim light, she could see it was indeed what looked like a puppy, though something about its proportions seemed a little odd. Its fur was matted and filthy, but appeared to be a silvery grey color underneath the mud. "There you go," Marin whispered. "Good puppy." The animal flinched at her voice but kept coming. When it was finally close enough, Marin very slowly reached out and touched its head. The fur was surprisingly soft beneath the grime. The creature tensed but didn't pull away. "You're freezing," Marin said, feeling how badly it was shaking. Without hesitation, she shrugged off her wet jacket and gently wrapped it around the trembling animal. To her surprise, it allowed her to pick it up, though it went rigid in her arms. "I'm going to take you somewhere warm and dry," she promised. "Just trust me, okay?" Holding the bundle close to her chest, Marin stepped back out into the downpour. The rain was still coming down in buckets, but she barely noticed it now, focused entirely on getting her precious cargo home safely. She walked as quickly as she dared, trying not to jostle the frightened creature. By the time she reached her house, Marin was completely drenched, her clothes plastered to her skin. She hurried around to the side door that led into the garage, fumbling with her key. The puppy hadn't made a sound the whole way, but she could feel its rapid heartbeat against her arms. The garage was dark and smelled of motor oil and lawn clippings. Marin carefully set her bundle down on an old workbench and felt along the wall for the light switch. When the fluorescent lights flickered on, she got her first good look at her rescue. The puppy was smaller than she'd initially thought, probably young. Its fur was a mess of tangles and mud, but she could see now that it had an unusual silvery sheen to it. The shape of its face was a bit different than any dog breed she recognized, something about the set of its eyes and the length of its muzzle. But what really caught her attention was a glint of metal around one of its front paws. Before she could examine it more closely, she heard the door from the house open. "Marin, is that you?" Her mother's voice called out. "Why didn't you come in the front door?" Thinking quickly, Marin grabbed an old beach towel from a stack of rags and draped it over the workbench, hiding the puppy. "Just a second, Mom." "I'm soaked. Didn't want to drip all over the house." Her mother, Elise, appeared in the doorway, frowning at the puddle forming around Marin's feet. "Good heavens, you're drenched. Go get changed right now before you catch cold." "Mom, wait," Marin said quickly. "I need to show you something, but promise you won't freak out." Elise's frown deepened. "What did you do?" Instead of answering, Marin carefully lifted the towel. The puppy cowered, pressing itself against the workbench surface. Elise's eyes widened. "Marin Elizabeth Latimer, you cannot bring home stray animals." "Mom, please," Marin pleaded. "I found it hiding under a dumpster in the storm. It's scared and cold and probably hungry. We can't just throw it back outside." "Honey, we don't know anything about this dog. It could be sick or dangerous." "It's not dangerous. Look how gentle it is." Marin stroked the puppy's head, and it leaned ever so slightly into her touch. "Please, Mom. Just for tonight. We can take it to the vet tomorrow to check for a microchip or something. I promise I'll take care of it." Elise sighed, but Marin could see her resolve weakening as she looked at the shivering creature. Her mother had always had a soft spot for animals in need, even if she tried to be practical about it. "Your father isn't going to like this," she said finally. Marin's heart leaped. "So we can keep it, just until we find its owner?" "One night," Elise said firmly. "And it stays in the garage. I'll talk to your father when he gets home from work. Meanwhile, you go get changed, and then we'll see about making some kind of bed for it." "Thank you, Mum." Marin hugged her mother, not caring that she was getting her wet, too. "Go on now." Elise shooed her towards the door. "I'll keep an eye on our guest." Marin raced upstairs to her room, peeling off her wet clothes and pulling on warm, dry ones as quickly as possible. Her mind was already working on how to convince her dad to let the puppy stay longer if they couldn't find its owner right away. Her father, Harlan, was even more practical than her mother, but he wasn't unreasonable. When she got back to the garage, she found her mother had already gathered up several old towels and arranged them into a makeshift bed in a corner, safely away from any dangerous tools or chemicals. The puppy was still on the workbench, watching them with wary eyes. "I found some of that leftover chicken from dinner," Elise said, "and a bowl for water. But Marin, remember this is temporary. First thing tomorrow we're taking it to Dr. Anderson to check for a chip and make sure it's healthy." Marin nodded, though privately she was already feeling protective of the small creature. She approached the workbench slowly, speaking in soft, soothing tones. "Hey there, sweet thing. Want to come down and get comfortable?" She held out her arms, and to her delight, the puppy allowed her to lift it again. She carried it to the towel nest and set it down gently. "There you go. Nice and cozy." The puppy turned in a circle 3 times before settling onto the towels, its eyes still fixed on them. Elise set down the bowl of water and plate of shredded chicken nearby. I'll leave you to get it settled," her mother said. "But don't stay out here too long. You still have homework to do." Once her mother had gone back inside, Marin sat cross-legged on the concrete floor near the makeshift bed. The puppy watched her for a long moment before cautiously stretching its neck out to sniff at the chicken. After a few tentative licks, it began to eat hungrily. "Poor thing," Marin murmured. "How long has it been since you had a good meal?" As she watched it eat, she noticed again the strange metal glint around its paw. In the better light of the garage, she could see it wasn't a collar or tag as she'd first thought. It looked more like a band or bracelet of some kind, fitted snugly around the leg just above the paw. The metal had an odd, almost iridescent quality to it. Before she could get a closer look, she heard the rumble of her father's car pulling into the driveway. The puppy's head snapped up, ears forward, body tense. "It's okay," Marin soothed. "That's just my dad. He's nice, I promise." The garage door began to lift, and the puppy scrambled backward, pressing itself against the wall. Marin's father's confused face appeared as he pulled his car in. "Marin? What are you doing out here?" His eyes fell on the towel nest and its occupant. "And what is that?" "Dad, don't be mad!" Marin started, but her mother appeared in the doorway before she could continue. "Harlan, we need to talk," Elise said in her diplomatic voice. Marin listened as her mother explained the situation, adding her own pleading comments whenever she could. Her father's expression went from surprised to concerned to resigned. "Just until tomorrow," he said finally. "We'll take it to the vet first thing and see if someone's looking for it." "Thank you, Dad." Marin beamed at him. "But it stays in the garage," he added firmly. "And you need to come in now and get your homework done before dinner." Marin looked at the puppy, who had relaxed slightly, but was still watching them all carefully. "Can I come check on it before bed?" Her parents exchanged a look, then nodded. "One quick check," her mother said. "Now come on, inside with you." The rest of the evening seemed to drag by. Marin had trouble concentrating on her math homework, her thoughts constantly drifting to the creature in the garage. She picked at her dinner, earning concerned looks from her parents, and rushed through her evening routine. Finally, after what felt like forever, she was allowed to go out to the garage one last time before bed. The storm had passed, but she could hear water still gurgling through the gutters outside. The puppy was exactly where she'd left it, curled up tight in its nest of towels. "Hey there," she whispered, kneeling beside it. "Just wanted to make sure you're okay." The garage was quiet except for the soft sound of the puppy's breathing. But she noticed how it tensed at every little noise from outside. A car passing on the street, the neighbor's screen door closing, the wind rustling through the bushes. Whatever this creature was, it was clearly used to being on high alert. "Don't worry," she told it softly. "You're safe here. I won't let anything bad happen to you." The puppy's eyes met hers, and for a moment Marin felt an odd connection, like it understood exactly what she was saying. That metallic glint on its paw caught her attention again, but she decided not to investigate it now. The poor thing had been through enough today without her poking and prodding at it. "Good night, little one," she said, standing up. "Sleep tight." As she headed back into the house, Marin felt absolutely certain she'd done the right thing by bringing the creature home. Something about it called to a sense of justice. No living thing deserved to be cold and scared and alone in a storm. Whatever happened tomorrow at the vet's office, she knew she'd made the right choice. She fell asleep that night to the sound of rain dripping from the eaves, dreaming of silver fur and mysterious metal bands that glowed in the dark. In the garage, the puppy lay awake, ears pricked at every sound, waiting for whatever might come next. The darkness before dawn hung heavy over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Inside the Latimer house, Marin lay awake in her bed, listening intently to the soft sounds coming from the garage where their rescued puppy rested. She hadn't been able to sleep much, her mind racing with worry about the mysterious animal they'd taken in. Suddenly, a high-pitched yip pierced the pre-dawn stillness. The sound echoed through the walls, making Marin bolt upright in her bed. It wasn't like any dog bark she'd ever heard. It was wild, almost ethereal. Before she could process what was happening, answering calls rang out from across the housing tract, their eerie chorus sending shivers down her spine. In the kitchen, Harlan Latimer froze with his coffee mug halfway to his lips. 20 years of camping and hiking had taught him to recognize that distinctive sound. His face paled as realization dawned. What they'd brought into their garage wasn't a lost puppy at all. "Elise!" he called out to his wife, his voice tight with concern. "I think we need to talk about our guest." Elise emerged from the hallway, already dressed for work but looking worried. "I heard it too. That's not a normal dog sound, is it?" "No," Harlan said grimly. "That's a coyote call, and whatever's in our garage just answered its family." Panic flashed across Elise's face as she hurried to the kitchen counter where she'd pinned various local service flyers to a corkboard. There was something about wildlife removal. I remember seeing it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she shuffled through the papers until she found what she was looking for, a bright yellow flyer with bold black text advertising "Nuisance Animal Removal, 24/7 Emergency Service." Marin appeared in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her face set with determination. "We can't just get rid of it. It's hurt. I saw something weird on its paw yesterday. It needs help." "Honey," Elise said gently, already dialing the number on the flyer, "if it's really a wild animal, we need professionals to handle this. We don't know if it's dangerous." Within 20 minutes, the rumble of an expensive SUV announced the arrival of Clint Warwick, owner of Warwick Properties and apparently the man behind the wildlife removal service. He stepped out of his vehicle wearing crisp khakis and a polo shirt that looked more suited to a golf course than animal control. Behind him, a second truck pulled up, and out stepped a burly man in work clothes who introduced himself as Mace Dillery, Warwick's contractor. "Appreciate you folks calling us so promptly," Warwick said, his voice smooth, but carrying an undercurrent of authority that made it clear he was used to getting his way. "Can't have wild predators running loose in a residential area. Bad for property values, you understand?" Marin hung back near the garage door, studying the two men with growing unease. Something about their presence felt wrong. They didn't look like any animal control officers she'd ever seen on TV or at school presentations. Warwick strode toward the garage, but Marin stepped between him and the door. "Wait! You can't just take it. It's hurt. Look!" She pointed to where the creature had left some tracks in the morning dew near the garage door. That's when another voice joined the conversation, calm, steady, and full of quiet authority. "Those are definitely coyote prints," said Ruth Carrow, their neighbor from across the street. The silver-haired woman approached with the confident gait of someone who'd spent decades in the wilderness. "Young one, from the size of them, and they're showing a regular pattern, no signs of rabies or disease." Marin watched as Ruth crouched down to examine the tracks more closely, her weathered hands hovering over the impressions in the ground. The retired park ranger's presence seemed to shift the energy of the confrontation, adding a voice of experience and reason. While Ruth studied the tracks, Marin caught a whiff of something peculiar, a sour, metallic smell coming from Mace Dillery's jacket as he moved past her. It reminded her of the meat section at the grocery store, but worse, mixed with something chemical. Her eyes darted to his hands, which showed fresh scratches, and then back to the garage where their rescue waited. "This animal needs to be removed immediately." Warwick insisted, his polished manner slipping slightly to reveal impatience. I have the authority to handle these situations, and I'm telling you it's dangerous to keep it here. Authority from whom? Ruth asked mildly, standing up and brushing off her knees. Because I know every licensed wildlife handler in 3 counties, and I don't recall seeing either of you gentlemen at any of our conservation meetings. Marin seized the moment of distraction to peek through the garage window. The morning light was growing stronger, and she could clearly see their rescue now. The pointed ears, the distinctive face that was definitely not a domestic dog. But what caught her attention most was what she'd noticed the night before, a thin, silvery scar around one of its front paws, like something had been removed. The sight made her stomach clench with sudden understanding. "You're not here to help it, are you?" Marin accused, turning back to face Warwick and his contractor. "That scar on its paw, did you put something there before? Is that why you really want it back?" Mace Dillery's face darkened, and he took a step forward, but Ruth smoothly inserted herself between him and Marin. "That's an interesting question," the former ranger said, "especially since tracking collars are strictly regulated, and I don't remember authorizing any studies in this area." Elise and Harlan exchanged worried glances, clearly torn between their desire to do the right thing and their fear of keeping a wild animal on their property. The tension in the air grew thick as morning birdsong began to fill the air, nature seemingly oblivious to the human drama unfolding. "Look," Warwick said, his voice taking on an edge of steel beneath its professional veneer. "You can either hand over the animal now, voluntarily, or I can come back with the proper authorities and make this much more complicated for everyone involved." But Marin stood her ground, even as tears threatened to spill from her eyes. "We promise to keep it safe," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "We promised until morning, and it's not even really morning yet. And when it is morning, we're taking it to a real vet, not somebody who smells like—" She wrinkled her nose at Dillery's jacket again. "Like old meat and chemicals." Ruth's eyebrows rose at this detail, and she cast a knowing look at the contractor's clothing. "Interesting choice of scents for someone in animal control," she remarked. "Smells more like the kind of bait that's been outlawed in this county for the past 5 years." The confrontation had reached a stalemate. On one side stood Warwick and Dillery, their facade of professional concern cracking under scrutiny. On the other stood Marin, backed by her uncertain parents and their surprisingly knowledgeable neighbor, all protecting a garage that now definitely contained a young coyote instead of the lost puppy they'd thought they'd rescued. "We'll wait for morning," Harlan finally declared, finding his voice and his courage in his daughter's example. "We'll take it to the vet ourselves, have it checked properly. If there's something wrong, they'll know what to do." "You're making a mistake," Warwick warned, his hands clenching into fists before he quickly relaxed them. "These animals are dangerous. They don't belong in civilized areas." "Funny," Ruth commented. "I always thought civilization was measured by how we treat those who need our help, not by how quickly we get rid of them." The rising sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Warwick and Dillery reluctantly returned to their vehicles, the latter shooting a dark look over his shoulder that made Marin step closer to her father. The rumble of their engines faded into the distance, but the morning air remained charged with the feeling that this confrontation was far from over. Inside the garage, the young coyote had gone quiet, as if sensing the gravity of what had just transpired. Through the window, Marin could see it huddled in the makeshift bed they'd created, its wild eyes alert but somehow trusting, as if it knew they'd chosen to stand between it and harm. Ruth stayed behind after the others left, examining the garage setup with approval. "You did good, keeping it calm and contained," she told Marin. "But those men will be back. They're not what they claim to be, and that concerns me deeply." "What do we do now?" Marin asked, looking between Ruth and her parents. "Now," Ruth said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of experience, "we document everything. Those tracks, that scar you noticed, everything. Because something tells me there's more to this story than just a lost coyote pup." The morning sun climbed higher, casting warm light through the garage windows. Inside, the young coyote shifted in its bedding, its presence now a catalyst for something larger than a simple rescue. The lines had been drawn, and the Latimer family had chosen their side, not out of political conviction or ecological activism, but because a 12-year-old girl had made a promise to keep something safe. And sometimes that's all the reason anyone needs to do the right thing. The tension in the Latimer's kitchen reached a breaking point as Clint Warwick pulled out his cell phone, his face flushed with anger. Without breaking eye contact with Harlan, he put the phone on speaker and dialed a number. "Jerry? Jerry Thompson? This is Clint Warwick. We've got ourselves a situation over at the Latimer residence." His voice dripped with authority as he addressed the Homeowners Association president. "They're harboring dangerous predators in their garage, in direct violation of community guidelines." Elisa's hands trembled as she gripped the kitchen counter. The morning light streaming through the windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in the room. "What kind of predator are we talking about?" Jerry's tinny voice crackled through the speaker. "A coyote." Clint spat the word. "These things are vermin. They'll attack pets, children, and the Latimers are keeping one right here in our development. Now hold on just a minute." Harlan stepped forward, his usually calm demeanor cracking. "This is an injured young animal. We're getting it proper help, not turning it loose in the neighborhood. Section 8, Paragraph 3 of the HOA bylaws clearly states no wild animals can be kept on residential property." Clint continued, speaking over Harlan. "That's a $500 fine to start, Jerry, and it compounds daily until the situation is resolved." Elisa's face went pale. $500? Daily? She turned to Harlan, worry etched across her features. "Maybe we should dash." "No!" Marin's voice rang out clear and strong. She stood in the doorway, still in her pajamas, her dark hair wild from sleep. "We can't give up on it now. That pup needs our help." "Young lady." Clint turned his cold gaze on her. "This isn't some stray kitten. It's a dangerous wild animal. It's injured." Marin insisted, her chin lifted in defiance. "And something's not right about how it got that way. That smell on Mr. Dillery's jacket, it's the same as what I smelled on the pup's fur." As evening settled over the neighborhood, that same sour smell haunted Marin's thoughts. She sat by her bedroom window, watching the streetlights flicker on one by one. The debate from that morning had ended in an uneasy stalemate, with her parents agreeing to wait just one more day before making a final decision. A movement caught her eye. Ruth Carroll was out front, examining something on the ground with a small flashlight. Without hesitation, Marin slipped on her shoes and jacket, then crept downstairs. Her parents were absorbed in the evening news, making it easy to slip out the front door. "Miss." "Ruth," she whispered, approaching the older woman. Ruth straightened up, her silver hair catching the street light. "I thought you might come out," she said softly. "Come look at this." Marin knelt beside her neighbor. In the beam of Ruth's flashlight, tiny paw prints were visible in the mud near the gutter. "Are these?" "Coyote tracks," Ruth confirmed. "But these are older than your friend in there. See how the rain started to wash them away? These follow the water flow from last night's storm. Together, they followed the trail of prints and watermarks." Ruth's experience as a park ranger showed in how easily she spotted signs Marin would have missed. A tuft of fur caught on a fence, the way grass had been repeatedly trampled in certain spots. They moved carefully through the growing darkness, Ruth's red-filtered flashlight casting just enough light to see by without drawing attention. The subdivision gave way to an undeveloped area where a concrete drainage wash cut through the landscape. Ruth held up a hand, signaling Marin to stop. "Something's not right," she whispered, sweeping her light across the ground. "Look there." Marin's stomach turned as the red beam illuminated several piles of raw meat, each carefully tied to metal stakes driven into the ground. The stakes had distinctive caps on top, and even from several feet away, that sickly sweet bait smell was unmistakable. "M44S," Ruth breathed, her voice tight with anger. "Or something very similar. They're spring-loaded poison bait stations, totally illegal in residential areas, illegal almost everywhere, in fact. When an animal pulls at the bait..." She didn't finish the sentence. "But why would someone?" Marin's voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "They're not trying to keep the coyotes away. They're trying to draw them in. To kill them." "Exactly." Ruth's face was grim in the red light. "This isn't random. Someone set up a whole system here. Multiple bait stations, carefully placed along natural game trails and water routes." A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness behind them. Ruth immediately switched off her light. "We need to go," she whispered, carefully and quietly. "We've seen enough." They made their way back towards the streetlights of the subdivision, moving as silently as possible. Marin's mind raced with the implications of what they'd discovered. The injured pup in their garage wasn't just a victim of chance. It was part of something much darker. "What do we do now?" Marin asked as they reached the safety of the street. Ruth's eyes were steel in the lamplight. "First, we document everything. I took photos while you were looking at the bait stations. Then we contact the proper authorities, not the HOA, but state wildlife officials who handle illegal hunting and trapping cases." They paused at the corner where their paths would split. "Marin," Ruth said softly, "be careful. Whoever set those traps knows exactly what they're doing, and they probably won't be happy if they find out someone's discovered them." Marin nodded, the weight of their discovery settling heavy on her shoulders. This wasn't just about saving one injured coyote pup anymore. It was about exposing a deliberate plan to harm wildlife, right in their own backyard. As she walked back to her house, Marin could hear distant coyote calls echoing across the development. They sounded different to her now, not threatening, but vulnerable. Someone was systematically trying to eliminate them, using cruel and illegal methods. The pup in their garage might have been the first one they'd found, but how many others had already fallen victim to those poisoned bait stations? Ruth's kitchen was a warm sanctuary as the afternoon light filtered through lace curtains. The elderly former park ranger spread out a collection of maps and property records across her worn oak table, her weathered fingers tracing lines that told a disturbing story. Marin leaned in close, her 12-year-old eyes scanning the documents with growing understanding. "See these parcels here?" Ruth pointed to several recently highlighted areas. "Clint Warwick's been buying them up quietly over the past 6 months, but look at the pattern they make." She connected the dots with her finger, forming what looked like a long rectangular shape. Marin's brow furrowed. "It looks like a strip?" "Exactly." Ruth nodded gravely. "There's been talk around town about expanding the private airstrip. These purchases line up perfectly with those rumors." She pulled out another document, this one showing wildlife incident reports. "And suddenly there's all these predator problems being reported in the exact same areas. So he's trying to get rid of the animals to clear the land." Marin's voice quivered with anger and disbelief. "That's what it looks like. If he can prove there's a danger to the community, he could justify using lethal methods to remove the wildlife." Ruth's eyes held a determined gleam. "But we need proof before they try to take that pup." Ruth disappeared into her study and returned with a sturdy-looking trail camera and a small bottle with clear liquid inside. "This here's a UV dye marker," she explained, holding up the bottle, invisible to the naked eye but glows bright under black light. "And this camera's caught many a nighttime visitor in my garden." Marin handled the equipment carefully as Ruth explained how everything worked. The plan began taking shape. They would set up a decoy stake marked with the UV dye and position the cameras to catch anyone who might tamper with it. "Remember," Ruth instructed as they pulled on clean gloves, "we have to be extremely careful about scent. These folks know what they're doing, and they'll be looking for signs of tampering." They worked methodically in the growing dusk. Ruth showed Marin how to handle the meat without leaving their own scent traces, and how to position the camera for the best coverage while keeping it hidden from casual observation. They found a perfect spot near where they'd discovered the previous bait sites, but far enough away to not raise immediate suspicion. "What if someone catches us?" Marin asked nervously as they worked. Ruth had her practice various scenarios. "Just act natural. You're a curious kid interested in wildlife photography. Nothing suspicious about that." They rehearsed different responses until Marin felt more confident. Back at the Latimer's house, they transformed the garage into their operations center. Ruth helped Marin set up a small workstation on an old card table, carefully arranging spare batteries, extra memory cards, and a notebook for recording timestamps and observations. "The plan is simple," Ruth explained as they made final preparations. "We document everything. Who comes near the bait, when they touch it, where they go. The UV dye will leave traces on their hands and clothes, evidence they can't easily explain away." Marin glanced at the coyote pup, now sleeping peacefully in its makeshift bed of towels. "Do you think one more night is safe?" Ruth's expression was serious but reassuring. "It's our best chance to gather the evidence we need. Tomorrow morning, we'll have proof of what's really going on." They worked late into the evening, checking and double-checking their equipment. Ruth showed Marin how to properly handle the memory cards, how to record detailed notes, and most importantly, how to stay safe while gathering evidence. "Remember," Ruth emphasized, "this isn't about catching anyone in the act. We're just gathering information. If you see anything suspicious, you come straight to me. No heroics." Marin nodded solemnly, understanding the gravity of their mission. They had transformed her family's garage into a proper staging area, with everything they needed to document the truth about what was happening in their community. The UV dye marker sat ready in its bottle, the trail camera was charged with fresh batteries, and their notebook was prepared with precise columns for recording times and observations. Everything was in place for their first coordinated action to protect not just the pup, but all the wildlife in their area. As night fell, Ruth gave Marin's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "Get some rest, dear. Tomorrow's going to be an important day." She smiled warmly. "You're doing the right thing, you know. Sometimes standing up for what's right isn't easy, but it's always worth it." Marin watched Ruth walk back to her house next door, then turned to look at their preparation work. The garage had become something entirely different, a place where they might actually be able to make a difference. The sleeping pup let out a tiny sigh in its sleep, and Marin felt more certain than ever that they were on the right path. She checked the locks one final time and made sure everything was secure before heading inside for the night. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but for now they had a plan. They had their equipment, and most importantly, they had hope. The night settled quietly around the neighborhood, with no one else aware of the careful preparations that had been made, or the evidence they hoped to gather. In the garage, the pup slept peacefully, unaware of the efforts being made on its behalf, while the cameras waited silently in their hidden positions, ready to reveal the truth about what was really happening in their community. Ruth's hands trembled slightly as she rewound the trail camera footage on her small digital screen. The kitchen was quiet, except for the soft whirring of the device and the occasional worried sigh from Marin, who stood peering over Ruth's shoulder. The timestamp in the corner read 12:17 a.m. when a familiar figure appeared in the frame. There. Ruth's finger jabbed at the screen. That's Mace Dillery, clear as day. The grainy night vision footage showed Mace skulking near the wash, his movements furtive as he checked what appeared to be bait stations. He was wearing the same jacket that had carried that sour meat smell Marin had noticed earlier. I knew something wasn't right about him. Marin whispered, her voice tight with worry. What's he doing out there so late? Ruth's lips pressed into a thin line. Nothing legal, that's for certain. Harlan, Elise, come look at this. Marin's parents moved closer, their faces growing more concerned as they watched the footage. Elise wrapped her arms around herself, while Harlan's jaw clenched visibly. But Clint showed us that contract? Elise protested weakly. He said they had permission. Ruth was already typing on her laptop, pulling up the county's public records database. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, belying her age. After a few minutes of searching, she let out a triumphant, "Aha!" Just as I suspected, she announced, turning the screen so everyone could see. That nuisance removal contract Clint was waving around, it expired 3 months ago. They have no current authorization to be setting traps or removing wildlife. The implications settled heavily over the room. What had started as a neighborhood dispute about a rescued pup had suddenly become something much more serious. So they're breaking the law? Harlan asked, his voice low and intense. Ruth nodded grimly. Operating without valid permits, setting unauthorized bait stations, and based on what we found yesterday, likely using illegal devices too. Those M44-style lures are strictly regulated. This isn't just about one coyote pup anymore. We're looking at a systematic illegal predator removal operation. Marin's eyes went wide as she glanced toward the garage where the pup was hidden. Then we have to get the baby back to its mother right away, before they can use it against us. Marin's right. Ruth agreed, looking at Elise and Harlan. The longer we keep that pup, the more leverage they have. They could try to paint us as the ones breaking the law by harboring wildlife. Elise and Harlan exchanged worried looks. The stakes had risen considerably from their initial agreement to keep a lost puppy overnight. I understand the urgency, Harlan said carefully. But we need to be smart about this. We can't just go rushing out there, especially not after dark. Agreed, Ruth said. We need proper planning. First, light reconnaissance, carefully mapped routes, and nobody goes anywhere alone. We stay within sight of each other at all times. Elise nodded, her maternal instincts clearly warring with her concern for safety. What exactly would this involve? Ruth pulled out a topographical map of the area and spread it across the table. We'll start here, at the eastern edge of the subdivision where we found those first tracks. There's likely a den site somewhere along this ridgeline. Coyotes prefer elevated spots with good visibility. We'll need to move quietly, look for signs, and document everything we find. Documentation is crucial. Harlan agreed, his business background showing through. If we're dealing with illegal activities, we need solid evidence. Ruth pointed to several spots on the map. We'll want photos of any bait stations we find, GPS coordinates, and detailed notes about their placement. The expired permit gives us leverage, but proving they're using illegal devices would be even better. Marin had been unusually quiet, studying the map intently. What about the pup? She asked finally. How do we make sure it gets back to its mother safely? Coyotes are excellent parents, Ruth explained gently. If we can locate the den and get the pup close enough, the mother will retrieve it. They're naturally cautious but fiercely protective of their young. But what if Clint and Mace are watching? Marin's voice quavered slightly. That's why we do this smart, Ruth assured her. We go in daylight when they're less likely to be active. We stay together, we keep our eyes open, and we document everything. This isn't just about returning the pup anymore, it's about stopping them from hurting other animals. The gravity of the situation settled over the room. What had begun as a simple act of kindness, rescuing what seemed to be an abandoned puppy, had evolved into something much larger. They were now faced with exposing an illegal wildlife removal scheme, one that threatened not just this single family of coyotes, but potentially many other animals as well. Elise moved to stand behind Marin, placing her hands on her daughter's shoulders. I know this isn't what any of us expected when you found that pup, sweetheart. But I'm proud of you for standing up for what's right. Harlan joined them, his expression determined. We'll need to be careful, though. These men have already shown they're willing to break the law. We do this by the book. No risks, no confrontations. Agreed, Ruth said firmly. First light tomorrow. We start our reconnaissance. Everyone carries a camera. Everyone stays within sight of the group. We document everything we find, but our priority is getting that pup back to its mother safely. They spent the next hour planning their route, marking potential observation points and discussing emergency procedures if they encountered Clint or Mace. Ruth showed them how to use the GPS on their phones to mark locations and take photos with embedded coordinates. She emphasized the importance of wearing neutral colors and moving quietly, teaching them basic wildlife observation techniques she'd learned during her years as a park ranger. The pup in the garage yipped softly, as if sensing the activity was somehow related to its fate. Marin went to check on it, returning with a worried expression. It's getting restless, she reported. I think it knows something's happening. Animals are intuitive that way. Ruth nodded. The sooner we can reunite it with its family, the better. But we do this right. No shortcuts, no risks. As they finalized their plans for the morning, the weight of their undertaking hung heavy in the air. This was no longer just about saving one young animal. They were now involved in exposing a potentially dangerous illegal operation. The expired permit and evidence of unauthorized bait stations had changed everything, raising the stakes far beyond what any of them had imagined when Maureen first found the shivering pup under that dumpster. Everyone should get some rest, Ruth advised as the evening grew late. Tomorrow will be a long day, and we need to be alert. As they prepared to leave, Marin lingered by Ruth's door, her young face etched with concern. Do you think we'll really find its mother? Ruth smiled warmly, placing a gentle hand on Marin's shoulder. Nature has a way of working things out, especially when good people help it along. We'll do this right, and that little one will be back where it belongs. The group dispersed to their respective homes, each lost in thought about the challenges that lay ahead. The simple rescue of a seemingly abandoned puppy had evolved into something far more complex. A mission to not only reunite a family, but to expose and stop those who would harm wildlife for their own gain. Marin made one last check on the pup before bed, its bright eyes following her movements in the dim garage. Just hold on a little longer, she whispered. We're going to get you home, and we're going to make sure no one can hurt your family again. The night settled over the neighborhood, but there was little rest for those involved in the unfolding drama. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, and hopefully, justice for the creatures who couldn't speak for themselves. The expired permit and evidence of illegal activities had transformed their mission, adding urgency and importance to what had started as a simple act of kindness. Now they weren't just saving one life. They were fighting to protect many more. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in deep oranges and purples as Marin, Ruth, and the rescued coyote pup made their careful way along the concrete drainage wash. The evening air was cool and still, carrying distant yips and howls that made the pup's ears prick forward with interest. Easy now, Ruth whispered, her experienced eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Stay close to the wall where the shadows are deepest. Marin nodded, cradling the pup gently against her chest. She could feel its rapid heartbeat through her jacket. Every few minutes, the little creature would answer the far-off calls with excited yips of its own, like a beacon leading them toward its family. They moved slowly, deliberately, using every bit of cover the concrete channel provided. Ruth had shown Marin how to walk heel to toe to minimize noise, and the 12-year-old girl was proving to be a quick study. Her sneakers made barely a whisper against the ground. "Look there," Ruth murmured, pointing to some marks in the soft earth near the washer's edge. "What do you see?" Marin studied the ground carefully, remembering everything Ruth had taught her about tracking earlier that day. "Fresh scat?" she answered quietly. "And those grass blades are bent over. Something passed through here recently." Ruth smiled approvingly. "Good eye." "And those prints in that damp patch?" "Coyote tracks," Marin said with growing confidence. "Adult-sized, and they look fresh. The edges are still sharp, not crumbled." They continued their careful progress, following the signs that told them they were on the right path. The pup grew more animated with each passing minute, its tiny body trembling with anticipation. The distant calls were getting closer now. Near a large concrete culvert, the pup suddenly went very still in Marin's arms, its whole body rigid with attention. Ruth held up a hand, signaling them to freeze. They waited in complete silence, barely breathing. A shadow moved in the gathering dusk. Slowly, cautiously, a lean adult coyote emerged from the culvert's mouth. Its fur was a beautiful mix of grey and tan, healthy and full. Marin's heart leaped. The animal showed no signs of injury or illness, and its movements were smooth and natural. The mother coyote's amber eyes flicked rapidly between the humans and her pup, assessing the situation. Her nose twitched constantly, taking in their scents. Though clearly wary, she showed no aggression, only careful, calculating patience. Following Ruth's earlier instructions, Marin slowly lowered herself to a crouch. Her movements were smooth and deliberate, nothing sudden that might startle the mother. With infinite care, she loosened her hold on the pup. The mother coyote edged closer, each step measured and ready to retreat if necessary. But something in her posture told Marin this was right. This was exactly what they'd hoped would happen. The pup wriggled free of Marin's gentle grasp and tumbled forward on unsteady legs. In 3 bounds, it disappeared into its mother's fur, immediately blending into her coat as if it had never been separated. The sight made Marin's heart swell with joy and relief. They'd done it. No drama, no complications, just a simple, peaceful reunion, exactly as they'd hoped. The mother coyote gave them one last appraising look, then turned and slipped back into the culvert with her recovered pup, vanishing into the growing darkness. "Perfect," Ruth breathed, her weathered face breaking into a warm smile. Couldn't have asked for better. Marin felt tears of happiness prickling at her eyes. "They're together again," she whispered. "We really did it." Ruth squeezed her shoulder gently. "You did good, kid. Real good. Now let's get those cameras set up before we head back." They worked quickly but quietly, setting up the trail cameras in strategic spots around the culvert and near the suspicious bait stations they'd discovered earlier. Ruth showed Marin how to angle them properly and check the battery levels, making sure everything was secure and well hidden. "These will help us catch anyone who comes sniffing around those baits," Ruth explained as they finished concealing the last camera. "If Mace or anyone else tries anything funny, we'll have it all on video." As they prepared to withdraw from the area, Marin took one last look at the culvert where the coyote family had disappeared. The success of the reunion filled her with a deep sense of satisfaction, but she knew their work wasn't done yet. They still had to prove what Clint and Mace were up to, and protect not just this family, but all the local wildlife from their schemes. "Ready to head back?" Ruth asked softly. Marin nodded, finally turning away from the culvert. They retraced their steps carefully, staying in the deepening shadows, moving as quietly as they had come. The evening chorus of crickets and distant coyote calls followed them home, a reminder that the wild world was still very much alive and present, even here on the edges of their subdivision. Their careful planning and patience had paid off in the best possible way. A mother and pup reunited, safe and free. Now it was time to make sure they stayed that way, one carefully documented piece of evidence at a time. The peaceful dawn shattered without warning. The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the horizon when the explosive sound of baying hounds ripped through the quiet morning air. The harsh barking echoed off the concrete walls of the wash, multiplying the noise until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Marin, who had been checking the trail cameras with Ruth in the early morning light, felt her heart jump into her throat. They had returned at dawn to document any overnight activity, but this was the last thing they'd expected. Through the morning mist, they saw Mace Dillery charging down the steep embankment, his heavy boots sending loose gravel skittering down the slope. Two large hunting hounds strained at their leashes, their noses pressed to the ground, and their deep voices filling the air with threatening howls. "No, no, no!" Marin whispered, her eyes immediately searching for the coyote family. She spotted them near the culvert where they'd had such a beautiful reunion just hours before. The mother coyote's ears were pinned back, her body tense as she assessed the threat. The pup, still wobbly on its legs, stood frozen for a moment before the mother nudged it into motion. But instead of following its mother's swift retreat, the pup hesitated near the spillway, clearly confused by the overwhelming noise and chaos. Ruth grabbed Marin's arm and pulled her behind a large boulder. "We need to create a diversion," she whispered urgently. "Try to guide them away from Mace and those hounds." Marin nodded, understanding immediately. She picked up a small rock and threw it far to the left of where Mace was heading, making it clatter against the concrete. Ruth did the same on the other side, trying to create enough noise to guide the coyotes toward safer ground. But Mace was too quick. He changed direction, cutting off the most obvious escape route. "This is about public safety!" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the wash walls. "These predators can't be allowed to stay in a residential area!" The mother coyote darted away from the noise, but the pup remained near the spillway, trembling and uncertain. The sound of the baying hounds seemed to paralyze it with fear. Marin's fingers flew across her phone screen, sending a desperate text to her parents. "Emergency at Wash. Mace here with dogs. Need help now." The morning dew had left everything damp, and as the rising sun caught the metal stakes hidden in the weeds, they glittered like warning signals. The evidence of Mace's illegal baiting operation was still there, clear as day, but right now that didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping the coyotes safe. "The concrete's too slick!" Ruth called out in alarm, watching the pup's uncertain movements near the spillway. The smooth surface, wet with morning condensation, could be treacherous for the small animal. Marin heard the sound of car doors slamming above them on the rim road. Looking up, she saw her parents, Elise and Harlan, hurrying toward the edge of the wash. Their faces were tight with worry as they took in the scene below. The peaceful reunion they'd achieved just hours ago had transformed into a nightmare. The baying of the hounds grew louder as they strained against their leashes, and the pup's confusion seemed to grow with each passing second. What had been a moment of triumph had become a desperate race against time. The mother coyote circled back, unwilling to abandon her pup, but unable to get close enough to help with Mace and the dogs blocking her path. Her distress was evident in every movement, every quick dart forward followed by a reluctant retreat. The morning air grew thick with tension as the situation balanced on a knife's edge. The glittering bait stakes stood as silent witnesses to the true nature of what was happening. Not public safety, as Mace claimed, but a calculated plan to remove the wildlife by any means necessary. "Keep those dogs back!" Ruth shouted at Mace, her voice carrying the authority of her years as a park ranger. "You're only making things worse." But Mace seemed beyond reason, his face set in grim determination as he continued to advance. The hound's excited baying grew even louder, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The pup took a hesitant step on the slick concrete apron, its paws slipping slightly on the wet surface. The morning sun had not yet dried the condensation that made the spillway treacherous. Every movement the small animal made seemed precarious, balanced between safety and disaster. Elise and Harlan made their way down the embankment as quickly as they safely could, joining the growing tension in the wash. The situation that had seemed resolved just hours ago had exploded into a crisis that threatened not just the immediate safety of the coyotes, but the exposure of the entire illegal baiting operation. The evidence was literally glittering in the morning sun, the stakes with their cruel purpose still firmly planted in the ground. But right now, that proof seemed secondary to the immediate danger facing the confused and frightened pup on the slippery concrete. The mother coyote made another attempt to reach her pup, darting forward before the baying hounds forced her back again. Her movements showed increasing desperation as she tried to find a way through the chaos to reach her stranded young one. The morning air filled with a cacophony of sound, the deep baying of the hounds, Mace's angry shouts about public safety, Ruth's attempts to reason with him, and the scared whimpers of the pup as it tried to find a way to escape the nightmare that had erupted around it. What had started as a quiet morning of documentation had transformed into a desperate situation that seemed to be spiraling further out of control with each passing moment. The peaceful reunion of the night before felt like a distant memory as the crisis unfolded in the harsh light of dawn. The pup's paws scrabbled frantically on the wet concrete as it skittered toward the spillway. Marin's heart leaped into her throat as she watched the small animal losing its balance on the slick surface. Without thinking, she sprinted forward, her sneakers sliding on the algae-covered concrete that glistened with moisture from the overnight rain. "Marin, no!" Elise's scream pierced the air, but Marin couldn't stop now. The pup needed her. Her feet slipped and slid with each step as she pursued the frightened animal. The concrete surface was treacherous, coated with a thin film of green algae that made it as slippery as ice. The morning sun hadn't yet burned away the dampness, and every movement felt dangerous. Water from last night's rainfall rushed through the spillway, creating a constant roar that seemed to grow louder with each passing second. The current looked stronger than usual, swollen from the recent downpour. Dirty brown water churned and frothed as it raced past, carrying leaves and debris in its powerful grip. Marin's foot suddenly shot out from under her, and she felt herself falling. Her hands shot out instinctively, and she crashed hard against a rusted rebar grate that crossed the spillway. The impact knocked the breath from her lungs, but she managed to keep her grip on the metal bars. The water surged around her legs, its force surprising and frightening as it tried to pull her sideways. "Hold on!" Harlan's voice carried over the rush of water. She could hear the panic in her father's tone as he scrambled down toward her. The pup huddled against the grate just a few feet away, its fur soaked and its small body trembling. Its eyes were wide with fear as it pressed itself against the metal bars, trying to stay clear of the surging water. Marin could see the steel scar on its paw, the mark that had first made her suspicious of Mace's intentions. Above them, she could hear Ruth's authoritative voice trying to reason with Mace, while Elise called out in frightened concern. The baying of the hounds added to the chaos, their excited barks echoing off the concrete walls of the spillway. Harlan moved with quick efficiency, his years of practical experience showing in his actions. He grabbed a length of garden hose that had been discarded near the edge of the spillway and looped it securely around a sturdy guardrail. The green rubber hose stretched taut as he tested it, making sure it would hold his weight. "Marin, stay still!" Harlan called out as he anchored himself with the makeshift safety line. "I'm coming to get you!" The water pulled at Marin's legs with growing strength, its cold grip seeming to tug harder with each passing moment. She pressed herself against the grate, trying to maintain her position while keeping an eye on the frightened pup. The metal bars felt rough and rusty against her hands, but she didn't dare loosen her grip. Her clothes were soaked through now, adding extra weight that made it harder to hold on. The water level seemed to be rising slightly, probably more runoff from the overnight rain making its way down to the spillway. Every few seconds, a surge would push against her legs, threatening to sweep them out from under her. Harlan inched his way carefully down the slick concrete, using the hose as both an anchor and a guide. His movements were deliberate and controlled, each step tested before he put his full weight down. The muscles in his arms stood out as he gripped the hose, using it to maintain his balance on the treacherous surface. "Almost there," he called to Marin, his voice steady despite the tension evident on his face. "Just hold on a little longer." A movement caught Marin's attention, and she looked up to see Mace advancing along the edge of the spillway. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched him raise what looked like a rifle, its dull metal surface lacking any kind of markings or identification. "I'll handle this," Mace shouted, his voice carrying an edge that made Marin's skin crawl. "Got to take care of these predators before they hurt someone." The word predators came out like a curse, and Marin could see the same cold determination in his eyes that she'd noticed when he first showed up at their house. He was moving the rifle into position, and even though he called it a tranquilizer gun, something about its unmarked surface made Marin doubt his words. "Don't you dare!" Ruth's voice rang out, filled with the authority of her years as a park ranger. "That animal is not threatening anyone." The pup whimpered, pressing itself closer to the grate, its small body shaking with fear and cold. Marin could feel its trembling as she reached out carefully, making sure to keep one hand firmly gripped on the metal bars. The little creature's fur was soaked through, its usually fluffy coat now plastered against its skinny frame. Harlan reached them then, his strong hand gripping Marin's arm. She could feel the steadiness of his hold, the way he locked his grip to ensure she wouldn't slip away. The water continued to push at her legs, but her father's presence gave her the courage to move. "I've got you," Harlan assured her, his voice calm despite the dangerous situation. "Let's get you both out of here." Marin carefully gathered the pup closer, cradling it against her chest with one arm while keeping her other hand linked with her father's. The small animal didn't resist, seeming to understand that she was trying to help. She could feel its rapid heartbeat against her own chest, matching the frightened pounding of her own heart. Above them, she could hear her mother's worried voice mixing with Ruth's continued attempts to reason with Mace. The hounds were still baying, their excited barks creating an unsettling backdrop to the already tense situation. Through it all, the water continued to rush past, its constant roar a reminder of the immediate danger they faced. One wrong move, one slip on the algae-slick concrete, and Marin knew she could be swept beneath the grate. The spaces between the metal bars were wide enough that a person could be forced through by the water's pressure. The thought made her stomach clench with fear, but she forced herself to focus on her father's steady presence and the precious burden she held against her chest. Harlan began to guide them back up the spillway, keeping a firm grip on both Marin and the hose that served as their lifeline. Each step had to be carefully placed, the wet surface offering almost no traction. The pup remained surprisingly still in Marin's arms, as if it understood the precariousness of their situation. Water continued to surge around their legs, its force a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Marin could feel the current trying to pull them sideways, testing their balance with each step. Her shoes slipped slightly with every movement, but her father's grip never wavered. The morning sun caught the water droplets spraying up from the spillway, creating tiny rainbows that seemed strangely beautiful against the tense backdrop of their situation. Marin focused on these small points of light, using them to help maintain her concentration as they made their slow way to safety. Above them, Mace continued to advance with his rifle, his boots scraping against the concrete as he tried to find a better position. The weapon in his hands looked even more menacing from this angle, its unmarked surface suggesting something far more sinister than a simple tranquilizer gun. "Stay back." Ruth's voice carried the weight of authority. "You have no legal right to be here with that weapon." The mother coyote paced anxiously at the edge of the spillway, torn between concern for her pup and fear of the humans and dogs. Her presence added another layer of tension to the already complex situation, her worried movements reflecting the same maternal concern that Marin could see on her own mother's face. Just then, the distinctive whoop of an old ranger siren cut through the tension. Ruth's weathered pickup truck came swinging around the bend, its tires kicking up gravel as she pulled to a sharp stop. The familiar green and gold uniform of a state wildlife officer was visible through her passenger window. The officer was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, his movements quick but controlled. His name badge caught the morning light, Officer Dan Martinez. His expression was stern as he took in the scene. Marin and Harlan still partially in the water, Mace with his tranquilizer rifle, and the trembling pup. "Everyone stay exactly where they are," Officer Martinez commanded, his voice carrying authority that made even Mace hesitate. Ruth emerged from her truck, carrying a small black case and what looked like a handheld UV light. "The decoy stake is just up there," Ruth called out, pointing to where they'd placed their trap. "And I've got the trail cam footage time-stamped and ready." Officer Martinez nodded, his trained eyes scanning the area. "Miss Warwick," he said, addressing Clint, who had just arrived at the scene, panting from his hurried approach. "Would you mind showing me your hands, please?" Clint's face reddened. "What? This is ridiculous. This is private property." "Sir, your hands, please," the officer repeated, more firmly this time. Ruth stepped forward with the UV light, switching it on. Under its purple glow, Clint's hands lit up like a Christmas tree, telltale fluorescent traces from the marked decoy stake they'd planted. Marin, now safely pulled back from the water's edge by her father, reached into her pocket with shaking hands and pulled out a small camera memory card. "We have video too," she said, her voice stronger than she felt. "It shows them placing bait near the public drainage stakes." The officer took the card, his expression growing more serious. "Ruth, can you show me where you mapped those M44 devices?" Ruth produced a detailed map from her truck, spreading it out on the hood. "Here, here, and here." She pointed. "All illegal placement, especially near public access points." Officer Martinez turned to Mace, who still held the tranquilizer rifle. "I'll need that weapon, sir." Now. Instead of complying, Mace's grip tightened on the rifle. His knuckles went white as he glanced between the officer and Clint, who gave him an almost imperceptible nod. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mace's muscles tensed as he started to raise the rifle. But Officer Martinez was faster, trained for exactly these situations. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, disarming Mace with a practiced move that sent the rifle clattering to the concrete. "Hands behind your back," the officer ordered, already producing his handcuffs. The metal clicked shut around Mace's wrists as he began reading him his rights. Clint's bluster turned to desperate argumentation. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, his voice rising. "This is private property. You have no jurisdiction." "Actually, Mr. Warwick," Officer Martinez cut him off, "I have here multiple violations of state wildlife protection statutes, including illegal placement of M44 devices, unauthorized use of tranquilizer weapons, and baiting wildlife in residential areas." He patted his chest pocket where he'd stored the memory card. "And now I have video evidence placing you at the scene." Ruth stepped forward, her expression grim but satisfied. "The UV traces on your hands match the marked bait we documented. The trail cameras caught you checking the illegal devices. And those M44s?" She shook her head. "They're exactly where we mapped them." "This isn't about property lines anymore, Clint. This is about breaking the law." The evidence was mounting rapidly. Officer Martinez methodically collected each piece. The UV-marked hands photographed and documented, the illegal devices carefully excavated and bagged as evidence, the video footage secured. With each new item, Clint's face grew paler, the reality of his situation clearly sinking in. Marin stood close to her father, the pup still trembling but safe in her arms. She watched as Officer Martinez coordinated with Ruth, their movements efficient and practiced as they documented everything. The morning sun had fully risen now, casting long shadows across the concrete spillway where just minutes ago she'd been fighting for her life and the pups. "We'll need statements from everyone," Officer Martinez announced, pulling out his notebook. "Miss Latimer, why don't you start by telling me exactly what happened, from the beginning?" As Marin began recounting the events of the past few days, she could see the bigger picture coming together in the officer's notes. Every piece of evidence, the UV traces, the video footage, the illegal devices, was another link in the chain connecting Clint and Mace to their illegal baiting scheme. The pup shifted in her arms, its wet fur starting to dry in the morning sun. Its mother was still nearby. Marin could sense her presence in the brush, waiting patiently for a chance to reunite with her baby. Soon, she thought, soon this would all be over, and they could be together again. Officer Martinez finished taking statements and began coordinating with other authorities who were arriving on scene. The evidence was overwhelming, the case against Clint and Mace growing stronger with each passing minute. Their illegal operation had been exposed, their methods documented, and their scheme thoroughly dismantled. Ruth approached Marin and Harlan, a gentle smile on her weathered face. "You did good, kid," she said softly. "Real good. Sometimes doing the right thing isn't easy, but it's always worth it." Marin nodded, watching as Clint and Mace were led to separate patrol cars. Their counterplan had worked perfectly. The trap they'd set with the UV-marked bait, the strategically placed cameras, Ruth's careful mapping of the illegal devices. Everything had come together exactly as they'd hoped, turning what had started as a simple rescue into something much bigger: the exposure and shutdown of an illegal wildlife baiting operation. The morning continued to unfold with the methodical processing of the scene. Evidence was catalogued, photographs were taken, and official reports were filled out. Through it all, Marin held on to the pup, knowing that soon, very soon, she would be able to complete what she'd started, returning this small, brave creature to its mother, this time with the full protection of the law behind them. In the weeks that followed, justice moved swiftly through the system. The evidence against Clint Warwick and Mace Dillery was overwhelming, leading to multiple charges related to illegal wildlife baiting and endangerment. The court proceedings painted a clear picture of their scheme, how they had tried to manufacture a predator problem to justify clearing the land for Clint's airstrip expansion. The consequences were severe. Clint faced hefty fines and criminal charges that effectively destroyed his leverage over the proposed expansion project. His reputation in the community, once built on a facade of respected business leadership, crumbled as the details of his illegal activities became public knowledge. Mace's punishment struck at his livelihood. His wildlife control license was permanently revoked. The state board's decision was unanimous, citing his willful disregard for regulations and public safety. He would never again work in wildlife management. The fines imposed on both men were substantial, with the court directing the funds toward a specific purpose: habitat restoration along the Wash. Ruth helped oversee the restoration project, ensuring the money was used effectively to enhance the natural corridor that the local wildlife depended on. As spring settled into summer, the coyote family thrived in their undisturbed den. Marin would occasionally spot them at dawn or dusk, the mother leading her growing pup through the chaparral, teaching vital lessons about survival. They kept their distance, as wild things should, but their presence was a reminder of the importance of maintaining natural boundaries. One sunny Saturday morning, the Latimers visited the local animal shelter. This time, they were looking for an actual dog, a companion to join their family. Marin led the way through the kennels, her parents following with newfound trust in her judgment. They stopped at a pen housing a medium-sized mixed breed with gentle eyes and a wagging tail. "What do you think about this one?" Elise asked, watching as the dog pressed against the fence to greet them. Marin studied the dog thoughtfully, applying the observational skills she'd learned from Ruth. "She's calm, but interested. See how she's making eye contact? And look at her body language. She's confident, but not aggressive." Harlan nodded approvingly. "You've really learned a lot about animal behavior, haven't you?" They ended up adopting the dog, naming her Luna. Unlike their brief adventure with the coyote pup, this was a relationship meant to last, a proper pet for their family. But Marin's connection to wildlife wasn't over. Ruth had approached her with an opportunity, a position in the junior wildlife mentorship program she ran. 3 afternoons a week, Marin would help with tracking, observation, and conservation projects. "You've got good instincts," Ruth had told her, "and more importantly, you understand the balance, when to help and when to step back." The change in her parents' attitude was subtle but significant. Where they had once been doubtful of her judgment, they now showed a deep respect for her insights. They listened when she spoke about animal behavior or environmental concerns. The trust she had earned during the coyote incident had evolved into something broader, a recognition of her growing competence and maturity. One evening, as Marin sat on their back porch with Luna at her feet, she watched the sunset paint the chaparral in golden light. Her mother joined her, 2 cups of hot chocolate in hand. "You know," Elise said, passing one mug to Marin, "I was scared when you first brought home that coyote pup. I thought you were being impulsive, maybe even reckless." Marin wrapped her hands around the warm mug. "I know. I was scared too, but I knew it was the right thing to do." "You did know," Elise agreed. "You saw what we didn't. Not just a wild animal that needed help, but the bigger picture, the illegal baiting, the threat to the whole ecosystem." She smiled softly. "I'm proud of how you handled everything." Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar sound, a distant coyote call, answered by others across the Wash. Luna's ears perked up, but she remained calm, already learning the difference between neighborhood dogs and wild canines. The following week, during one of her mentorship sessions with Ruth, they tracked signs of the local wildlife, not to interfere, but to understand. Ruth taught her how to read the landscape, to recognize the subtle markers of animal activity, and most importantly, to respect the boundaries between human and wild spaces. "It's all about balance," Ruth explained as they documented rabbit tracks near the Wash. "We share this space with them, but we have to be mindful of where we draw the lines." Marin nodded, thinking of how different things might have been if Clint and Mace had understood this simple truth. Instead of trying to eliminate the wildlife, they could have learned to coexist with it. As summer progressed, the restoration project along the wash began to show results. Native plants took root, providing better cover for small animals. The wildlife corridor grew stronger, offering safe passage for the creatures that called it home. The coyotes remained present but discreet, fulfilling their natural role in the ecosystem without conflict. The headlines about Clint's illegal activities and subsequent legal troubles had faded from local news, but the impact of those events continued to ripple through the community. More importantly, they had transformed relationships between neighbors, between humans and wildlife, and within families. For Marin, the true measure of change was in the quiet moments. Her parents asking her opinion about animal tracks in their yard, Luna learning to be calm around wild scents, Ruth teaching her to identify bird calls at dawn. These were the signs of trust restored and boundaries respected, of competence recognized and wisdom shared. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.